is our first event for chief data officers, chief data architects and engineers, the analytics and visualization teams. So from their perspective, in their context, what is your session going to deliver for them?
Thanks very much for having me, and especially for this sneak peek. New South Wales has been on quite a data journey. We started out some time ago with the Data Analytics Centre. We've been doing data-driven projects using data science, and over the years, we've realised that there are some really big frameworks we need to put in place. Last year, we released our AI strategy, policy and how-to guide. We also released our Smart City, Smart Places strategy and frameworks. We've just recently released our data sharing strategy, and that may seem to have cart before the horse or the wrong way around, but really data sharing is the big game. So as we've been moving along, we've been trying very hard to reframe the conversation around outcomes and indicators, build the frameworks for data sharing and data governance for different types of data. Not all data sets are the same. And also identify the data as an asset. So identify the most valuable data assets within New South Wales Government and genuinely treat them like assets and build the systems and frameworks around them that allow us to appropriately value the data that we've got.
That's great. I'm really glad that you mentioned data as an asset, because I was speaking with Rocky on just today, and he also mentioned data as an asset and treating it as an intangible asset and value, creating value from it. Now it seems like there are different roles for data as such within organizations, and we're talking a lot about how we create value externally. But when we look at the ADAPT survey that we conducted, we also see that there's huge challenges internally from the data, the value of data that has not been able to be generated because of a lot of challenges. So, and there are different, roles in terms of chief data officer, chief data architect, engineers, data visualization and analytics teams, and everyone seems to be working in a different accord. How do you, from your experience, and especially how you, planned the whole data journey within New South Wales Government, what are some of the best practices that you are seeing? What's working?
You just asked a very, very big question. So there are one of the things about data, of course, is it has many, many different uses, and it has different value to different people depending on the use. So why you want to use data really, really matters. And it matters quite profoundly. It matters because when you're thinking of the role of the data custodian, thinking about all the different risks and governance issues associated with the use of that data custodian needs to look down at the end use case and the way the data gets there in order to understand whether or not the frameworks are appropriate, the use is appropriate, the authorizing mechanisms are appropriate. The other aspect is, of course, that not all data sets are the same. Some data sets are really sensitive and really personal, and the sensitivities come from so many different dimensions. Some data sets are not that sensitive, but still have personal information. Some data sets are very sensitive and not have personal information, and some are neither sensitive nor personal. So again, the issues you need to think about, the roles and responsibilities you need to contemplate depend very much on the data subject itself, and again, how that data is going to be used, again, those sensitivities along that data lifecycle. So the upshot of all of this is it's complicated, and it's complicated depending on how you intend to use the data and for what purpose. So that complexity often inhibits data sharing and use, and often inhibits really the release of value from data. So the first question you asked was around the value of data itself, treating data as an asset. It seems insane that we rely so much on data, but we don't have an accounting standard that would actually recognize data as an asset. So we are genuinely trying to put value on the data assets we create and the data assets that we use. And some of it is what it costs to create. Some of it is what would someone pay to access the data, and we say pay in nominal terms in terms of government, and what would the damage or the impact or the harm be if the data was accidentally released. And so trying to develop frameworks like that give us a sense of what the value of the data asset is, but also, again, thinking across the entire data lifecycle where we need to put in place governance and processes. That then speaks to the second part of the question you asked, and that's the different roles. Because we look across data from the capture or creation to the transmission, to the storage, to the analysis, to the use of insights or reuse of insights, to archiving and then potentially deletion, the roles change. during the course of that. So it really is important to think about the roles that swap in and out, whether it's a data engineer or a data architect or a data scientist, that essentially has different levels of primary responsibility at different stages in that data life cycle. And I guess the final part of all of that is that it's so complicated and the roles change so much depending on where you are in the data life cycle and the context, that we need to simplify it. So one of the aspects of the new data strategy is, can we take all of these complexities and actually map them to a couple of different sorts of templates, a really high trust environment where you need to have expert people working in a highly authorized, highly secure environment, all the way through to, this is data we're going to release as open data, and the terms and conditions and frameworks and expectations you put on those different layers of levels of trust or levels of security need to flatten out, need to simplify, because quite honestly, the complexity is so great. If we don't map it to 3 or 4 or 5 templates, then we get nowhere. So that was a very, very long answer, but you asked a very, very big question.
That was a very succinct answer, Ian. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially with looking at what our audiences are struggling with are exactly those things, as to what is the entire outcome that they're trying to achieve, and then what is the life cycle or the journey of data. And from what you shared, I almost feel like the whole journey can be divided into the actual roles of people who take care of data at each journey, so that the outcomes can be achieved, and then it sort of becomes a circle. So very, very keen to understand more about the framework and how it tackles these areas in the session. What are you personally most excited about for 2021-22 from the data perspective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think, at least looking around at my colleagues, the use of data is inevitable. The use of smart, whether it be artificial intelligence or more sophisticated machine learning, is inevitable. And as we continue to deliver better experience for the customers of New South Wales, and that's the language we're using in New South Wales, not citizens, but customers, as we deliver better, more personalised, more seamless services to the customers of New South Wales, we are deliberately but cautiously moving forward with our increased use of data. The exciting part is that I think we now, after, at least from my perspective, after all of these years of doing and trying, are really starting to build useful frameworks that allow us to talk about things in terms of outcomes which are described in very public, principles-based, which we can argue about and we can debate, but then this is a language that we can describe in human terms. But we're now starting to build the pathway between the principles and the bits. We're starting to build the frameworks that allow us to connect what we want to achieve to measures, to risk frameworks, and the policies associated with that, all the way down to, and this is what we do with this data set, and this is what we do with this data set under these circumstances. So that journey between the principles and the bits is starting to actually make sense, and we're starting to build genuine frameworks that allow us to move all the way down to what an engineer or an architect or a data scientist could and should do, back up to the real world of outcomes, principles-based outcomes. That's exciting. It's really starting to come together.
If you had to just give one piece of advice as to one thing that every organization should definitely just start off with, that 1% improvement on their data strategy, what would that be?
So that's, again, a really tricky question. When talking about trying to achieve these big real world outcomes, we talk about some no regrets activities. And the no regrets activities typically refer to improving your own data capability. So you don't need to be perfect to get started. You should just get started and try to improve your ability to use and analyze. But if you really ask for one thing, it's data quality. Data quality is the thing, the biggest of the sensitivities that really drive people away from data sharing and use. If people are worried about their data quality, they're worried about insights that are generated, they're worried about how it reflects on the organization. So as a no regrets activity, invest in improving data quality.
Oh, great. What really stuck with me is evaluating data, the asset value, the framework, and then no regrets attitude. Well, thank you so much, Ian, for talking to me. I hope the audiences are going to really like your session and take away a lot from it.